Imagine opening a refrigerator full of last night's scraps, wilted greens, cold rice, a bowl of cloudy broth and bones stripped nearly clean. And instead of seeing garbage, seeing gold. That is exactly what a Chinese grandmother sees. While the modern world throws away nearly a third of all food produced, she hasn't wasted a single grain of rice since 1962. What does she know that we've forgotten? The answer might save you hundreds of dollars a year and change the way you see your kitchen forever. Hi, my name is Mike, and this is Asian Lifestyle. Why the Chinese never waste food. Before we get into the tricks, you need to understand the mindset. Without it, these are just recipes. With it, they become a philosophy. China has survived famines that emptied entire provinces. The Great Famine between 1959 and 1961 took the lives of tens of millions of people. Whole generations grew up knowing what real hunger felt like. Not the inconvenient kind where you can't decide what to order. The kind that changes you permanently. Food, in that context, is never casual. It is sacred. There is a Chinese proverb that says, "He who wastes food insults the farmer." Children were taught this before they could hold chopsticks properly. To throw away rice was not just careless. It was a moral failure. And out of that moral weight came extraordinary creativity. When you cannot waste anything, you are forced to become brilliant. Every scrap became an opportunity. Every bone became a foundation. Every wilted leaf became a second chance. That creativity is exactly what we are about to explore. Rice rescue. Let's start with rice, because in a Chinese kitchen, rice is everything. It is the beginning of the meal, and more importantly, the beginning of the next one. Trick 1. Day-old rice for fried rice. Here is something that will sound backwards until it makes perfect sense. Fresh rice is actually terrible for fried rice. When rice is freshly cooked, it is soft, moist, and clumpy. Toss it in a hot wok and it turns into mush. But leave that same rice uncovered in the refrigerator overnight and something magical happens. The grains dry out, firm up, and separate. Each kernel becomes its own individual soldier, ready to take on high heat, soy sauce, egg, and whatever leftovers you have hiding in the crisper drawer. Chinese home cooks have known this for centuries. They never cook fresh rice for fried rice on purpose. They always plan one meal ahead. The leftover becomes the better dish. That is not an accident. That is engineering. Trick 2. Rice water as soup base. When you drain the water from washing rice, most people pour it straight down the sink. Stop. That cloudy, starchy liquid is the beginning of a soup base that costs absolutely nothing. In Chinese kitchens, rice water is simmered with ginger, a few vegetable scraps, and a pinch of salt until it thickens slightly. It becomes a gentle, nourishing broth that has been used for centuries to soothe sick stomachs and to stretch a meal for one into a meal for three. Rural families during lean winters survived on this. You are pouring survival down your drain every time you wash rice. Trick 3. The crispy rice bottom. In some parts of China, the burnt crust that forms at the bottom of the rice pot is considered the best part. I know that sounds like something someone says to make you feel better about a cooking mistake, but stay with me. This crispy layer, called goba, is intentionally created by leaving the rice on low heat just a little longer. Once dried and broken apart, it becomes a crunchy base for soups and sauces. Pour a hot braised pork sauce over it, and it sizzles dramatically at the table. Restaurants in China charge extra for this. You have been scrubbing it off your pot and throwing it away. Trick 4. Congee from the last scraping, when the rice pot is nearly empty and what remains is barely a serving, the Chinese do not cover it and forget it. They add water, a lot of it, and slowly cook it down into congee. This is rice porridge. Humble, quiet, deeply comforting. It stretches almost nothing into a full bowl. Add a preserved egg, a strip of ginger, and a drizzle of sesame oil, and you have breakfast or dinner, or honestly, 3 in the morning food after a long night. I will be honest, that is when congee really shines. Vegetable sorcery. The Chinese approach to vegetables is almost defiant. Nothing gets thrown away before it has been given at least 2 more chances. Trick 5. Ice water revival for wilted greens. Vegetables do not go from fresh to dead in one step. There is a long middle stage that most people mistake for the end. Wilted, limp greens that look like they have given up completely can be revived by submerging them in ice-cold water for 20 to 30 minutes. The cells rehydrate and the leaves firm up. They will not look like they just arrived from the market, but they will be perfectly usable for stir-frying or soup. Chinese grandmothers have been doing this rescue operation quietly for generations. They see wilting not as a death, but as a warning. Act now, and the vegetable is still yours. Trick 6. Vegetable scrap stock. This one requires a jar and some patience. Every time you peel a carrot, trim a green onion, snap the woody end off an asparagus, or pull the outer leaves from a cabbage, put those scraps into a jar in the freezer. Not the bin, the freezer. When the jar is full, everything goes into a pot with cold water, a few peppercorns, and a piece of ginger. It simmers for an hour. Then it gets strained. What you have is a free stock, 0 cost, made entirely from things you were about to throw away. In Chinese kitchens, this is not a trendy zero-waste movement. This is just Tuesday. Trick 7. Broccoli stems shaved into stir-fry. Most people eat the florets and throw away the stems. The stem is actually where the real texture lives. Chinese cooks peel the tough outer layer and slice the inner core into thin rounds or matchsticks. It stir-fries beautifully, absorbs sauce perfectly, and has a mild sweetness that plays well with garlic and oyster sauce. 1 head of broccoli suddenly feeds more people. The part you discarded becomes the part everyone reaches for. A cucumber that has been sitting in the refrigerator for a few days, slightly soft, slightly sad, is not garbage. It is halfway to a pickle. Chinese quick pickling uses rice vinegar, sugar, salt, and chili. The cucumber soaks for a few hours and emerges transformed. Bright, sharp, and crunchy enough, it is ready to sit alongside a bowl of rice or noodles as a palate cleanser. This is a trick that turns a vegetable on its way out into a condiment on its way in. Trick 9. Carrot tops and radish leaves as garnish. Carrot tops are slightly bitter and herb-like. Radish leaves are peppery and fresh. Chinese cooks do not throw these away. They chop them fine and scatter them over finished dishes as a garnish, or wilt them briefly in a hot wok with garlic for a quick side dish. Free greens, completely edible. Most people in the modern world don't even realize you can eat them because the grocery store cuts them off before they reach the shelf. Meat magic. Meat is where Chinese leftover wisdom becomes genuinely breathtaking. Because meat is expensive, and nothing about an expensive ingredient gets wasted. Trick 10. Leftover pork becomes dumpling filling. Cold, leftover pork, whether roasted, braised, or stir-fried, gets chopped fine and mixed with whatever vegetables are available, a bit of ginger, soy sauce, and sesame oil. Then, it goes inside a dumpling wrapper. The dumpling transforms yesterday's dinner into today's completely different meal. Nobody at the table knows they are eating leftovers. They think they are eating dumplings. And they are delicious. This is the trick of disguise. reshape the leftover, and it becomes something new. Trick 11. Chicken bones into white broth. After a whole chicken is eaten, what remains is not garbage. What remains is the beginning of a broth that in some Chinese restaurants sells for as much as the original dish. The carcass goes into cold water. Not hot water, cold. This is important. Starting in cold water and bringing it slowly to a boil draws out collagen from the bones in a way that creates a thick, milky, deeply savory white broth. Add ginger and green onion. Simmer for 2 hours. The bones you were going to throw away have now produced enough broth to form the base of tomorrow's noodle soup, rice porridge, or braised vegetable dish. 1 chicken, 3 meals. That is Chinese arithmetic. Trick 12. Fish scraps steamed with ginger. Fish heads, fish collars, fish tails. These are the pieces that get trimmed and discarded in most Western kitchens. In China, they are fought over at the table. The cheek meat of a fish is considered the most delicious bite. Fish heads are steamed with ginger and scallion and a splash of soy sauce, then finished with a pour of sizzling hot oil that crackles against the herbs and awakens everything. The collagen around the bones melts into a rich, silky sauce. This is not making do with scraps. This is preferring the scraps. Trick 13. Cold roast meat sliced thin for noodle toppings. Cold leftover meat has a different texture than hot meat. The fat firms up, the fibers tighten, and it slices cleanly into thin, almost translucent pieces. Chinese cooks understand this. They let the leftover roast pork or duck cool completely, and then slice it thinly against the grain. Layered over a bowl of hot noodles in broth, the cold meat warms through just enough, without overcooking. The contrast between hot broth and cool meat is intentional. It is not a leftover. It is a technique. Egg alchemy. Eggs in Chinese cooking are one of the most versatile tools in the kitchen. And when you have leftover bits of everything and a few eggs, something remarkable happens. Trick 14. Leftover everything. Egg fried into a roll. This is the great Chinese leftover equalizer. Whatever is in the refrigerator, a few cold noodles, some wilted vegetables, half a bowl of rice, a strip of pork, gets tossed together into a hot wok with beaten egg. The egg coats everything, binds everything, and creates something that looks intentional. Chinese egg rolls and omelets were not originally designed as recipes. They were designed as containers, a way to wrap whatever existed into something unified and hot. My grandmother used to make this every Friday with the entire week's leftovers, and none of us ever once complained. In fact, Friday was everyone's favorite dinner. Trick 15. Tea eggs from old or cracked eggs. An egg that is cracked during boiling or has been sitting at the back of the refrigerator one day too long is not an egg to throw away. It is an egg ready to become a tea egg. The egg is hard-boiled. Then its shell is gently cracked all over without removing it. And it is simmered in a bath of dark soy sauce, black tea, star anise, cinnamon, and sugar for hours. The result is extraordinary. The marbled pattern where the tea seeped through the cracks makes each egg look like a precious stone. The flavor goes all the way through. Tea eggs have been sold from street carts across China for hundreds of years. They were born from necessity and survived because they are genuinely one of the best things you can do with an egg. Trick 16. Steamed egg custard from broken yolks. When a yolk breaks during cooking and the egg can no longer be fried properly, it goes into a bowl. Every broken yolk gets saved. Once enough have accumulated, warm stock or water is whisked in at a ratio of roughly 1 part egg to 1.5 parts liquid. The mixture is strained, poured into a shallow dish, and steamed over low heat until it sets into a trembling silky custard. Finish with a few drops of soy sauce and sesame oil on top. Done. This is one of the most comforting dishes in Chinese home cooking, and it starts with eggs that were technically mistakes. Bread, dough, and starch saves. The Chinese relationship with steamed breads and doughs follows the same logic as everything else. If it was worth making, it is worth saving. Trick 17. Stale mantou, pan-fried in butter. Mantou is the plain steamed bun eaten across northern China. Stale mantou that has dried out and lost its softness gets sliced thick and pan-fried in a thin layer of butter or oil until golden on both sides. The outside crisps and the inside stays soft and slightly chewy. It becomes something entirely different from what it started as. Children in northern Chinese families grew up eating this for breakfast. It is simple, it is fast, and if you dip it in sweetened condensed milk, it is genuinely one of life's small pleasures. I am just saying. Trick 18. Leftover dumpling wrappers as crispy chips. When you make dumplings at home and you have more wrappers than filling, or you buy wrappers and use most of them, the remaining ones are not trash. Cut them into strips or triangles. Brush them lightly with oil and bake or pan fry until they shatter like crackers. Add a pinch of salt or a dusting of 5 spice powder on top. They become a snack that costs nothing. In Chinese households, dumpling nights are famous for producing these crispy chips as a bonus, something to eat while the dumplings are still cooking. It is the best part of making dumplings, and it comes from the leftovers. Trick 19. Noodle cake from yesterday's noodles. Cold leftover noodles clumped together overnight in the refrigerator. Most people look at this sad, stuck mass and feel discouraged. A Chinese cook sees an opportunity. The clumped noodles are pressed flat into a hot oiled pan and left completely alone for several minutes. The bottom turns golden and crispy, while the inside stays soft. Then it is flipped. The result is a noodle cake, golden and crunchy outside, tender inside, that can hold braised meat and sauce on top like a plate. It is architecture. Yesterday's limp noodles have become today's structural element. Liquid gold. In Chinese cooking, the liquids are never an afterthought. They are often the most valuable thing in the pot, and they last far longer than the solids they came from. Trick 20. Soy sauce dregs as marinade. When a bottle of soy sauce nears its end, there is a thick, concentrated residue that settles at the bottom. Most people rinse it out. Chinese cooks add a splash of rice wine and a spoon of sugar to that bottle. Shake it vigorously and use the resulting dark, intensely flavored liquid as a marinade for meat or tofu. The concentration of salt and umami in that residue is higher than in fresh soy sauce. What looked like the end of the bottle was actually the richest part of it. Trick 21. Pickle brine. As seasoning after a jar of Chinese pickled vegetables is finished, the brine left behind is not poured away. It is saved. That brine is already perfectly seasoned with salt, vinegar, sugar, and whatever aromatics went into the original pickle. It goes into salad dressings, marinades, dumpling dipping sauces, or it is used to start the next batch of pickles. One jar of brine can season food for weeks after the vegetables are long gone. Nothing leaves the kitchen without giving everything it has. Trick 22. Leftover tea as meat tenderizer. Cold, leftover tea, especially black tea or oolong, contains tannins that break down muscle fibers in meat. Chinese cooks have known this for centuries without ever using the word tannin. Tough cuts of pork or beef are soaked in cold tea for several hours before braising. The result is noticeably more tender. The tea also adds a faint depth to the flavor that is hard to identify, but impossible not to notice. You taste it and think, what is that? You never guess it is yesterday's tea sitting on the counter. Preservation and storage genius. The final cluster is perhaps the most ancient. Before refrigerators, before canning, before plastic wrap, The Chinese developed preservation methods that kept food alive for days, weeks, and in some cases, years. Trick 23. Salt preserving leftover vegetables overnight. Here is a trick so ancient and so effective that it has outlasted every food preservation technology ever invented. And it requires exactly one ingredient you already have sitting in your kitchen right now. Any vegetable that will not be eaten today is not a vegetable headed for the bin. It is a vegetable headed for salt. The process could not be simpler. Slice the vegetables thin. Toss them generously with salt. Leave them in a bowl for several hours or overnight and walk away. That is the entire technique. What happens next is quiet but remarkable. Salt pulls moisture out of the vegetable cells through osmosis, and as that moisture draws out, it takes bitterness with it. What remains is a vegetable that is naturally preserved, slightly concentrated in flavor, and transformed in texture. Firm things become pleasantly tender. Mild things become interestingly complex. Something that was heading toward softness and waste has become a side dish, a topping, a condiment worthy of its own place on the table. It will last several more days now. Not hours, days. Salt has been doing this since long before refrigerators, long before canning, long before anyone thought to write a recipe down. It still works today exactly as well as it always did. Some technologies simply cannot be improved upon. Trick 24. Oil sealing to extend shelf life. Here is something that sounds almost too simple to be true, yet it has kept food safe and flavorful in Chinese kitchens for centuries, without a single piece of modern technology. When a leftover dish is stored, whether it is a braised pork belly, a cooked vegetable, or a seasoned paste, a thin layer of oil is poured carefully across the top before the lid goes on. That is it. That thin, shimmering layer becomes a seal. It sits between the food and the air above it, and that matters enormously, because air is the enemy. Air carries oxygen, and oxygen drives oxidation, the invisible process that turns good food stale and eventually dangerous. No air reaching the food means the food lasts significantly longer. Chinese families stored preserved meats and fermented pastes for weeks using nothing but this principle. No refrigeration, no vacuum sealing, just oil and understanding. But here is the part that makes this trick genuinely elegant. When the jar is finally opened, that oil is not discarded. It gets spooned out first and used for cooking, now carrying the flavor of everything it spent days sitting above. The leftover seasons the oil. The oil protects the leftover. In a Chinese kitchen, nothing works alone and nothing works only once. Trick 25. Fermenting small scraps into condiments. This is the final and most powerful trick, and honestly, it might be the one that changes everything for you. Small scraps of vegetables that have no obvious future. Odds and ends of ginger beginning to wrinkle. A few garlic cloves going soft. Half a chili. A lonely strip of radish. In most kitchens, these things vanish into the bin without a second thought. In a Chinese kitchen, they vanish into a jar. Salt goes in, a little water, sometimes a splash of rice wine, for good measure. Then the lid closes, and time does the rest. Within days, something alive happens inside that jar. Bacteria present on the vegetables, begin fermenting the sugars, building acidity, building depth, building flavor that no recipe could have predicted. Within a week, what was essentially kitchen garbage has become a complex, tangy, living condiment that earns a permanent spot on the table. The remarkable part is that the jar never truly empties. Chinese families have kept fermentation crock running for decades. Same brine, new scraps added every few days, the flavor deepening and evolving continuously. It costs nothing. It wastes nothing. And it tastes like something a chef spent hours creating. The scraps were never garbage. They were just waiting. Here is what strikes me most about all of this. None of these 25 tricks require a special ingredient, a piece of equipment, or a cooking class. They require attention. They require the decision to look at what you have and ask, what else can this become? The Chinese kitchen philosophy is not about restriction. It is not about eating less or going without. It is about respect. Respect for the labor that grew the food, the energy that cooked it, and the person who will eat it. Every grain of rice that went into that pot was planted, tended, harvested, transported, and prepared by human hands before it reached yours. Throwing it away is a very long insult to a very long chain of people. The generation that lived through famine in the 1950s and 1960s did not develop these habits by choice. They developed them by necessity. And then they passed them down. And somewhere along the way, as refrigerators got bigger and delivery apps got faster, the world started to forget that a cold pot of rice is not a problem. It is the beginning of tomorrow's best meal. Hundreds of dollars a year sit in the bins of modern kitchens, wrapped in the delusion that fresh is always better and leftovers are always less. The Chinese figured out the opposite was often true. A very long time ago. They were right. If you want to know more about how Asian cultures have turned scarcity into extraordinary culinary wisdom, there is another video waiting for you right now. Go watch it. I think you'll find it changes a few more things you thought you already knew.